Notre Dame moves on. They take out Georgia, and they take out another chance for the SEC to be in the title game. We will do the state of a declining conference, and we've got a Friday feedback for you on Thursday. So enjoy part 2 of today's show. Notre Dame advances, winning the Sugar Bowl against Georgia just moments ago. So we're taping for you here, throwing it on the front of the Friday feedback. And then I want to talk a little bit about the state of the SEC, because this is not what you were looking for, as another team is eliminated. Texas, the last hope for the conference. So Notre Dame wins 23-10. This was a game, I think if you're a Georgia fan in the beginning, wondering what Gunnar Stockton was going to look like, you probably felt good about it. We've talked about Georgia's drops all season long, and these guys are making some tough contested catches. They weren't running the football great, but the defensive line looked like they were in it. But let's do a little quick football math. Georgia in field goal range, fumble, -3 points. You fumble at the very end of the first half, a short field, touchdown, minus another 7 points. You could also question, like, look, when teams have a possession, I can't stand when teams don't look at the opportunity of having possession, even with less than a minute to go. But it was weird that Georgia would ice the kicker for Notre Dame prior to that, using one of their 3 timeouts, if then they were going to try to do whatever they could possibly do on the last possession. So something to think about there. Opening kickoff, even if you feel like Georgia has, I don't know why you would have felt they'd had momentum other than just a reset, and then Notre Dame runs it back. So that's another 7 points. So 17 of the 23 are on plays where, if you're Georgia with a quarterback who, granted, in a Texas SEC title game, it's not like he wasn't getting big game experience in that, but still a massive unknown going into this game. They're like, oh, okay, the defense is going to be all right, and the receivers might be a little bit better, although you had a huge drop from Bell in the second half. If you give him 17 points, you're probably not winning this football game. And I think the best part for Notre Dame, they line up on 4th down, look like they're going to punt it in the 4th quarter. They run their offense back onto the field. Georgia runs their defense back on the field. Georgia had already used a timeout in the second half. And as I'm watching it, I'm like, are they going to jump off sides? Are they going to jump off sides? They jump off sides. They convert the first down, obviously, off the penalty. So a great job by Marcus Freeman just messing with Georgia's players. Georgia had time to sub in, but I was thinking, like, should Kirby just call a timeout here to settle everybody down? Going, you realize they're probably not going to snap the football. And that's exactly what happened, because, I mean, even though they did snap it, I don't know if they were planning on snapping it. Maybe he addressed that in the post game. But obviously you'd want to snap it once you had Georgia lined up offsides to get the free shot on top of everything else. And after that play, they run 9 more plays, ultimately punting it, but it doesn't really matter, because at that point, I think it was 7:17 left when that happened in the 4th quarter. Yep, 7:17 left on the game clock. And then at that point, Georgia's getting the ball back with 2 minutes left and down 2 scores. So it wasn't going to happen for them. Notre Dame's O-line, I don't know that it mattered. I think their running to the edges was terrific, and the Riley Leonard runs were really, really big for them. And because when you looked at Riley Leonard, maybe they were just pacing him a little bit more towards the second half of the season and wasn't as big of a part of the offense. And they obviously have 2 great running backs to go with this group. I didn't know if that was something they were strategically doing, maybe trying to rest him up for a playoff run here. But a game that felt like, when it was 0-0 through the first quarter, I'm sitting at home going, this game is going to come down to one just absolutely enormous turnover. That's exactly what I felt after 15 minutes. Like, something is going to happen. It's going to be a low-scoring game. We thought that going into it. But ultimately, if one team has this disastrous turnover, that might decide the game. And that's what happened here. But credit Notre Dame for a bunch of different things in holding up enough, because early on it looked like Georgia was going to dictate this game the defensive front, because those guys actually look pretty good, but they got some good stuff on the edges. And Riley Leonard was really tough in this one. And Freeman to pull off that lineup for the punt thing and then sub out everyone and put in their offense and then get the penalty. Just a massive, massive part of the game. I mean, so many things went wrong for Georgia in this one. I cannot imagine the joy for Irish fans after Notre Dame seals the game. Not 0 on the clock, but the game is over. And the first ad is an SEC. It just means more ad. Your joy, if you were watching at home and you're a Notre Dame fan, or if you're just you know, you hate that conference. You must have enjoyed that. Another ad play. That was a little bit like when Playoff P, there was like the Paul George Gatorade ad, and they came right out to him missing a huge shot for the Pacers in the playoffs. Another ad I would ask about strategic placement. I don't know if a RuPaul drag queen TV show ad is best optimized for the Sugar Bowl audience. Just a thought. Okay, so Georgia loses. Let's talk SEC. So now with Georgia's loss to Notre Dame, the SEC is at 7-6 for their bowl record. I'm going to throw a lot of stuff at you here. I'm going to see if I can come to some kind of conclusion. We're going to work on this together. We're going to work it out together. The Big Ten's 8-5. The extra loss, though, a head-to-head Big Ten Oregon there, so you can make it 7-4 if you want to. If you want to say they only have 4 losses that are against non-Big Ten schools, that would be great too. I've done that in the past when the SEC's gone up against each other. But really what we're talking about here is the Big Ten and the SEC in this argument, because now it feels like, wait, is there a window here? Is this happening? Is the shift happening from all of those dudes like me that have, I don't want to say propped up the SEC, just argued in favor of it because I felt like the results backed it. I kind of could never really understand the opposition argument other than just people being prideful, people being sick of it. And like, look, I kind of get it too. I traveled, to 60 plus campuses. I've been covering college football now since 2006. I fell in love with college football all over again. I prefer Saturdays to Sundays when it comes to football. I think I've talked about this enough, but like I just fell in love with the sport again because I just remember when I was on the air in Boston, you could have the national championship game on the night before, and then we come in on a Tuesday and be like, all right, Red Sox offseason, do they have enough bullpen options? Seriously, like we didn't never, ever talked about it. So there's this gap for me of being super into it and then also having it be part of the job at ESPN. And I always felt like I came from it from a very honest position. I grew up in the Northeast. I went to Vermont, which is obviously a soccer factory, but I wasn't somebody that went to one of these schools. I didn't grow up or, with so many of the former guys that I worked with, these dudes that just played elsewhere. I'm like, you think I'm biased? Like this guy just picked Michigan again before Michigan was rolling like they were last year. So I know that some of you just don't want to hear it from me at all because you feel like I've been poisoned by the ESPN waters. And can only tell you, like, it's not really what you think it is, but I can understand how you come to that conclusion. So there's just a lot of stuff at work here for the passion and the anger and now the excitement, if you've hated the SEC, to see what continues to happen. Really a carryover of last year's bowl disappointments into this year with what we're looking at here, a barely 500 record, Texas being the only team that is left. And look, I get the SEC part of it. That's really, really annoying. I kind of thought, I'm like, why would anybody doubt Texas if they were in the playoff last year? They beat Bama at Bama in 23. Like, did people really think that they were going to struggle? And you talk to Texas fans, be like, yeah, like, that's all we heard. I'm like, well, I'm not monitoring all the message boards, like none of them actually, because I couldn't imagine what a waste of time it would be. But look, it's out there. It happens. I remember doing a live show in Gainesville, and we were doing trivia for College Game Day on radio. And there was some question about the Pac-12. And some guy, gator visor, jean shorts, right out of Central Casting. It was a Pac-12 question. He just screams, Pac-12 football 7-on-7. And you're just like, yeah, that guy kind of sucks. And he's annoying. And you hate him. And he doesn't even acknowledge you. And so I get where this all comes from. All right. But we do compare the conferences. And I think it's always important to kind of, because of sports and being so cyclical, like, are we in the middle of something? So let's run through some of the facts here. If Texas is eliminated against Ohio State, and by the way, I say that like in an exasperated voice because I can't imagine I'm picking against Ohio State the rest of this thing. So say Texas is eliminated, that would put them at 7-7. Be another win for the Big Ten against the SEC. And this year, the Big Ten has been terrific. Now we can get into like what each bowl result means. Like if you're a Bama guy, you can't be talking about opt-outs at the receiver position in that game against Michigan when they're missing 2 first-round defensive linemen. All right, so you can't do that. You can do it maybe you want to just pour over the rosters and who opted in and who opted out and what the bowls even mean. But all right, go ahead. Go for it. How does Bama lose to Michigan? Being that big of a favorite, you give them, what, 3 turnovers to start the game and they go 30 yards for like 16 points. That's how you lose that game. South Carolina losing to Illinois, I would think based on some of the weird Illinois results over the regular season, even though they have a really good defense, I didn't expect that. They pull that one out there too. So the record head to head here is completely in the Big Ten's favor. But more importantly, because I think when we talk about the best conference, and I'm not just going to run the draft stuff to you, right? Because all the draft picks didn't work this year, although I think it's generally a good thing to think the best players are on the best teams. I don't know what sport we don't do that with. But in this case, there's something happening where if Texas is eliminated, that would be 2 straight years where the national championship game does not have an SEC team in it. Last year, Michigan taking out Washington. And of course, whatever we end up with this year, if Texas is eliminated. That hasn't happened in 20 years. Back-to-back years where the national title game does not have an SEC team. 2004, USC and Oklahoma. 2005, that all-timer with Texas and USC. Yet LSU win it in 2003, but prior to 2003, from 99 to 02, it was 4 straight years without an SEC team in the national championship game. I was younger. I was not in the media. I remember liking it on CBS, being like, man, those games are kind of fun. But even in that window, I wasn't paying a ton of attention. I don't know if we talked about it that much, right? I don't know if we did what we're doing now. And look, we just have more access to each other, so we're just seeing a ton of it. So there's one part of it. We can look at the bowl records from the last few years. Again, the bowl thing is maybe not the best indicator, but look, the data is the data, and it's not been great for the SEC, although it's not some huge margin here. So part of me always feels like, so you're going to be sitting there whipping it out because you're over 500 in a bowl game in the bowl season. So the SEC last year was 5-4. The Big Ten was 6-4. In 22, the SEC was 7-5. The Big Ten was 5-4. In 21, the SEC was actually 6-8, but there was an extra loss in there because in 21, the title game was Georgia and Alabama. So nobody was going to hear an anti-SEC argument that year, me included. The Big Ten was 6-4 that year. In 2020, the SEC was 8-2. The Big Ten was 4-5. There was also a year back in 2014, we call it Danny Cannell Day, where the SEC just had an abysmal bowl season. He came in the next day to work being like, I'm right. I think Van Pelt even apologized to him. I was furious. I'm like, okay, let's see if this is actually something that is real. And it wasn't real. It was just a bad bowl season. But this is 2 straight years, and it's likely going to be 2 straight years without a team from the SEC playing for a national championship. So maybe we are in it. Maybe we're in this shift, which I do expect to happen in sports. And I don't know if it's the NIL. I don't, because that's honestly, you completely expose yourself as a non-ball knower when you're like, oh, finally the other schools can pay players. I mean, I love Shane Gillis too, but it's not really accurate. The portal thing may be true, but it's also true that players are leaving other programs to go to higher level SEC programs. So the portal's kind of working both ways. Again, I've got to see a couple more years of it to see if I'm ready to go, okay, the crown is now someone else's. And again, it's really probably only the Big Ten in this conversation. But there's a couple things I can never really get past. It's because the anti-SEC media members that I've been hearing about for 15 years, I think it got heated up about, I feel like 10 years ago is when it really got cranked up. But again, that's my only personal journey, so I could be wrong on that one, is that if you've hated the SEC, like the evidence is in your favor right now. Okay. It may be down. This may really be happening. But the people that hated the SEC said the same shit when none of the data was in their favor. So part of that makes me go like, is it all just disingenuous? Like, okay, you were right. It's been a bad stretch. This might be 2 years of this. But what were you saying when you didn't have any of this evidence? Well, you're saying the exact same thing. And the problem wasn't even that it was a moving target. It was like no target. It was always this vague, oh, it's not that much better. Okay, but explain what that means. Well, no, it's just not that much better. So you don't like the way one conference is talked about in relation to the rest of them. Because I'd ask you this, because this is really, you either hate or like this open based completely on your allegiance to any of this. But if you hate Kirk Herbstreit, right? If you think he is everything that is wrong with college football because of the Florida State argument last season, because of his Indiana takes, which I completely agreed with because you've already heard mine. If you hate him for that, do you love Joel Klatt? And do you love Joel Klatt because he is the righteous one here? Or is Joel Klatt just arguing against the thing you hate? Because that's, again, why it becomes so political. You may hate the opponent so much that you are voting and supporting something that you know is just as equally flawed, but you just hate that other side of it. And I think that's kind of what happens a lot of this. There was a college football tweet during the Oregon game from a college football writer. Oregon's getting blasted by Ohio State. It's 34-0. And this guy, because I can always tell whenever I'm looking at it, and I don't look at it that much anymore because I'm just exhausted by the whole thing. But it'll be like, ooh, that's kind of a spicy little number on that tweet. Let me look it up. Oh, went to a Big Ten school, right? And look, the SEC guys are just as obnoxious. Like, what'd you expect when Paul Feinbaum sits down when the playoff committee announces the 12 teams? Like, did you expect fair and balanced? Well, of course not. All right. So there's this tweet that's out there when Oregon's down 34-0, and the writer essentially says, I wonder if Kirk Herbstreit will spend the rest of the game saying that Oregon shouldn't be in the playoff. And that's where I sort of circle back around and go, I'm out again, because it's fucking stupid to say something like that. Oregon beat 3 playoff teams, Ohio State and Boise and Penn State, 13-0, Big Ten champs, and yep, they got smoked by Ohio State. You think you're making a good point, but you're actually making such a terrible point that then I'm like back on the other side of things. But here's the problem, is that my position, right, as a guy that thinks like the SEC superior and all these different reasons and the history, and I keep looking it up and I'm like, can you get to 5 teams in the Big Ten saying these 5 teams could all win a national championship within 15 years and it's not a completely reach for 4 or 5? And look, that used to be a better argument before they added teams like Oregon, Washington, who played in a title game. If USC ever figures their stuff out, there's far more options for that argument to go in the Big Ten's favor. But I'm left with kind of this thought again after 19 years of really being into this, because I do love the sport. And we could sit here and say, hey, let's all just chill out, but we're not going to. I'm not going to chill out, so I shouldn't expect you to either. But if you were on television covering finance, which I always find fascinating, that to do that every day has to be more exhausting than even sports, because sports, we can think a game is going to go some way. We're surprised all the time. And then we talk about what happened in the game and why we ended up at the outcome that we did. With stocks, it's just, nobody knows what the hell's going on, but you have to come up with a reason for why it happened. I've asked different people that we've had on from financial media about this, because I'm just like, you're on TV, like you have to kind of say something. And in the past, with some of these outcomes, I'm like, I feel like you're just talking about a stock being down. But if you put together the 2 years, and if Texas gets eliminated and some of these head-to-heads and what the Big Ten did to the SEC this year, I do think you're going on TV talking about the SEC being at not a 52-week low, but a 104-week low.